The autumn chill crept through Boston's streets as Emma finished her shift at Grubhub. At 11:45 p.m., one last order came in, a large pepperoni pizza to an address on the outskirts of town. Emma sighed, knowing this delivery would make her late getting home, but she accepted it anyway. As she drove through increasingly sparse neighborhoods, the streetlights became fewer and farther between. Her GPS directed her onto a narrow, winding road lined with towering trees that blocked out the moonlight. After what felt like an eternity, Emma arrived at her destination, an old Victorian mansion set back from the road, barely visible through overgrown foliage. Emma grabbed the pizza and approached the house cautiously. Paint peeled from the weathered siding, and several windows were boarded up. The porch creaked ominously under her feet as she rang the doorbell. No answer. She rang again and knocked, but still nothing. Just as Emma was about to give up and leave, she heard a faint sound from inside. Was that a muffled cry for help? Against her better judgment, Emma tried the door handle. To her surprise, it was unlocked. She called out as she entered the dimly lit foyer, but only silence greeted her. The musty air was thick with the smell of decay. Emma's instincts screamed at her to turn back, but concern for whoever might need help pushed her forward. She crept down a long hallway, floorboards groaning with each step. A sliver of light shone from beneath a closed door at the end. Emma approached slowly, her heart pounding. She knocked gently and called out again. No response, but she thought she heard movement inside. Taking a deep breath, Emma turned the handle and pushed the door open. The scene that greeted her was like something from a nightmare. The room was lit by flickering candles, casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the center stood a man hunched over a table, his back to Emma. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she realized with horror that the table held a human body. The man was methodically carving into the corpse with a large knife, peeling back the skin to expose muscle and bone beneath. Emma's gasp of shock alerted the man to her presence. He turned, fixing her with a cold stare. His face and clothes were splattered with blood. For a moment, they both stood frozen. Then the man lunged towards her with frightening speed, knife raised. Emma's survival instincts kicked in. She hurled the pizza box at his face and sprinted back down the hallway. She could hear his heavy footsteps right behind her as she raced for the front door. Just as she reached for the handle, a hand grabbed her hair, yanking her backwards. Emma screamed and struggled as the man dragged her towards the basement stairs. In desperation, she clove at his face and managed to break free. She stumbled out onto the porch, nearly falling down the steps in her haste. Emma ran to her car, fumbling with the keys as she heard the man emerging from the house behind her. She finally got the door open and started the engine just as he reached the vehicle. The man pounded on her window, his bloody face contorted with rage. Emma floored the gas pedal, tires screeching as she sped away down the long driveway. She didn't slow down or look back until she reached the main road, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. When Emma finally felt safe enough to pull over, she called the police with trembling fingers. She gave them the address and described what she'd seen, her voice breaking as the full horror of the experience sank in. The dispatcher assured her that officers were on their way to investigate and asked Emma to come to the station to give a full statement. As she waited for the police to arrive, Emma sat in her locked car, jumping at every sound. She couldn't shake the image of that blood-soaked room and the man's cold, predatory eyes. How many victims had there been before tonight? And how close had she come to being the next one? The next few hours passed in a blur as Emma recounted her story to the detectives. They told her she'd done the right thing by calling it in and assured her they would conduct a thorough investigation. But even as she finally headed home in the early hours of the morning, Emma knew she would never feel truly safe on a delivery again. In the days that followed, Emma learned that police had indeed found evidence of multiple murders at the house. The man, a suspected serial killer who had evaded capture for years, was now in custody thanks to her discovery. While this brought some relief, it did little to ease Emma's lingering trauma. She quit her delivery job immediately, unable to face the possibility of another nightmare scenario. For months afterwards, Emma struggled with vivid nightmares and panic attacks. Even everyday tasks like answering the door or walking alone at night became ordeals. She started seeing a therapist to work through her PTSD, slowly learning to manage her fears. Though Emma eventually found a new job and began to move forward with her life, the memory of that night stayed with her. She remained haunted by how quickly an ordinary delivery had turned into a brush with pure evil. Emma's story spread among other couriers as a chilling reminder of the dangers that could be lurking behind any door. Years later, long after the killer had been convicted and sentenced, Emma still found herself checking the locks twice at night and startling at unexpected noises. She knew that her chance encounter had likely saved lives by stopping a serial killer. But the cost to her own sense of safety and peace of mind had been devastatingly high. Emma's experience served as a cautionary tale in the food delivery community, prompting many companies to implement stricter safety protocols and emergency alert systems for their drivers. But for those who worked the late-night shifts in unfamiliar neighborhoods, there was always the lingering fear that the next delivery could be their last. A quiet autumn evening enveloped the suburbs of Portland, Oregon. Ryan, a young pizza delivery driver, received the last order of his shift. The address pointed to a remote house outside the city in a wooded area. Ryan sighed but decided to complete the order, hoping for a good tip. Driving along the winding road, Ryan noticed the city lights fading behind him. The dense forest on both sides of the road absorbed the headlights of his old sedan. The GPS led him to a narrow dirt path leading deep into the woods. After a few minutes, Ryan saw a lone two-story house standing in a small clearing. The only source of light was a dim window on the second floor. Stopping the car, Ryan took the pizza box and headed for the front door. Climbing onto the creaky porch, he rang the doorbell. Silence. Ryan knocked, but there was no answer. He was about to leave when he heard quick footsteps inside the house. The door swung open abruptly. A tall man in his 40s stood on the threshold, dressed in a dark shirt and jeans. Ryan froze in horror. The man's hands were covered with something dark and wet, which in the dim light of the porch looked like blood. The man stared silently at Ryan, his gaze cold and empty. Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. He wanted to say something, but the words got stuck in his throat. Suddenly, a muffled sound came from inside the house, resembling a groan. The man quickly turned around, then looked back at Ryan. His face contorted into a grimace, as if he was trying to decide what to do next. Ryan, overcoming his stupor, slowly extended the pizza box. The man suddenly grabbed it with his free hand, leaving bloody prints on the cardboard. With his other hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled bill. During this silent exchange, Ryan noticed a dark stain on the floor of the hallway behind the man. It looked like a trail, as if something heavy had been dragged across the wooden boards. The man shoved the money into Ryan's hand and began to close the door. At that moment, a gust of wind carried a heavy metallic smell from the house, which Ryan immediately recognized: the smell of blood. The door slammed shut, leaving Ryan in the darkness and silence of the night forest. He stood motionless for several seconds, trying to comprehend what had happened. Then, as if waking up, he rushed to his car. With trembling hands, Ryan started the engine and sped away, not caring that the wheels were scattering gravel. Once on the main road, he didn't slow down until he saw the city lights. Pulling over to the side of the road, Ryan tried to calm down. His mind was frantically processing what he had seen. Blood on the hands, the strange sound, the trail on the floor, the smell. Everything pointed to something terrible. Ryan took out his phone, intending to call the police. But then he hesitated. What if he was mistaken? What if the man had a reasonable explanation? Maybe he was butchering meat or helping an injured animal. Minutes passed, and Ryan sat in the car, struggling with himself. Part of him wanted to forget about this strange order and return to normal life. Another part screamed that he needed to report the suspicious situation. In the end, his sense of duty won out. Ryan dialed the local police station and reported his observations. The dispatcher listened attentively and said a patrol car would be sent to the address for a check. Ryan drove home, but sleep wouldn't come. He constantly checked the news, expecting reports of a gruesome discovery in the forest house. But nothing appeared. In the morning, Ryan learned that the police had indeed checked the house. The man explained that he was helping a friend who had been in an ATV accident. The blood belonged to his injured friend, whom he had taken to the hospital after administering first aid. The story seemed plausible, but something deep inside Ryan continued to doubt. He never took orders to that area again and flinched every time he saw houses surrounded by forest. This incident reminded Ryan and other couriers of how dangerous their job could be. You never know what awaits behind the next client's door. A regular family dinner or something much more sinister. Over time, Ryan found another job, but memories of that night delivery haunted him in nightmares for a long time. The image of the man with bloody hands became a symbol of all the fears and dangers that delivery workers face, especially after dark. This story spread among couriers as an urban legend, reminding everyone of the need to be vigilant and trust their instincts. Because sometimes an ordinary pizza order can turn into an encounter with something inexplicable and frightening. A cold October evening enveloped the streets of Seattle. Alex, a young bicycle courier working for a popular food delivery app, received the last order of his shift. The address pointed to an old warehouse district on the outskirts of the city. Alex grimaced, but decided to complete the order, hoping for generous tips. Pedaling through deserted streets, Alex noticed the city lights becoming sparse. The industrial zone greeted him with dark silhouettes of abandoned buildings and dim light from rare street lamps. A chilly wind pierced through, making Alex shiver. Following the navigator's directions, he turned onto a narrow alley between high brick walls. It was even darker here, the light from his bicycle lamp barely dispersing the gloom. Alex felt a chill run down his spine. Something about this place made him uneasy. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps came from behind. Alex turned around but saw only an empty street. He sped up, convincing himself it was just his imagination. However, a minute later, the footsteps were heard again, this time closer and faster. Alex's heart began to race. He glanced over his shoulder and saw a dark figure rapidly approaching him. A tall man in black clothes and a hood was almost running, closing the distance between them. Panic gripped Alex. He started pedaling with all his might, trying to escape the pursuer. The narrow alley seemed endless. Alex could hear the stranger's heavy breathing getting closer. Suddenly, a turn appeared ahead. Alex swerved sharply, nearly losing his balance. Around the corner, he saw a bright light, a gas station. Alex raced towards it, hoping to find help. But before he could cover half the distance, he felt a strong push. The pursuer had caught up and grabbed his backpack. Alex lost control and crashed onto the asphalt along with his bicycle. The impact knocked the wind out of Alex. He tried to get up, but the stranger was already looming over him. In the dim light of a distant street lamp, Alex saw the glint of metal in the attacker's hand. "Money, phone, quick," the man growled, pressing a knife to Alex's throat. With trembling hands, Alex took out his phone and wallet. The robber snatched them and stepped back. Alex thought it was over, but he was mistaken. "The backpack too," the stranger demanded. Alex slowly removed the backpack with the order. Just as the robber took it, the wail of a police siren sounded. The attacker cursed, dropped the backpack, and disappeared into the darkness of the alley. A police car stopped next to Alex. Officers helped him up and called an ambulance. While paramedics examined Alex, he told the police what had happened. Later, it turned out that a series of attacks on couriers had occurred in this area. The criminal used fake accounts to order food to deserted places where he robbed the delivery people. Alex escaped with bruises and scratches, but the psychological trauma was much more severe. He could no longer force himself to work as a courier, especially after dark. Every dark alley triggered panic attacks. This story quickly spread among Seattle's couriers. Many refused to take orders to certain areas after nightfall. Delivery companies were forced to strengthen security measures. They introduced real-time tracking of couriers' locations and installed panic buttons in the apps. However, even these measures couldn't completely eliminate the risk. The courier job remained one of the most dangerous, especially at night. Each trip could turn into an encounter with a criminal or falling into a trap. Alex found a new office job, but memories of that night haunted him for a long time. He no longer rode a bicycle and tried to avoid deserted places. His story became a warning to other couriers, a reminder that danger could lurk behind every order. Eventually, the police arrested the robber, but this only slightly calmed Seattle's courier community. Everyone understood that other criminals could take the place of the one caught. Work in food delivery had forever changed, becoming a game of cat and mouse between couriers and those who wanted to rob them. This story became an urban legend, told to newcomers on their first day of work. It served as a stark reminder of the need to always be alert, trust one's instincts, and not take risks for extra tips or a good rating. For Alex, life was divided into before and after that fateful night. He could no longer carefreely enjoy the night city or trust strangers. But his experience helped other couriers avoid a similar fate, making them more cautious and attentive. Alex's story showed that the world of food delivery harbors far more dangers than one might imagine. Behind every innocent order could lurk a trap, and an ordinary trip could instantly turn into a fight for survival.